This is a tough moment for President Trump. I think he means well. I've never questioned his intentions. I just question the information on which he bases his decisions.
Welcome back to the show. Joining me this week is one of my most popular guests, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, here at the headquarters of Our Country, Our Choice. Colonel Macgregor, it's so great to see you as always. Thank you so much for the privilege.
Sure, happy to be with you.
There's so much to talk about, so much uncertainty in the market. So I just want to get your views. Let's start with the trade war. What's your reaction to everything that's happening right now?
Well, I suppose it sort of ranges from horrified to depressed. I thought that there would be some tariffs, that they would be carefully targeted to specific markets and countries as opposed to this sort of blanket global war that President Trump launched. And of course, he's already scaled back quite a bit because it had an immediate and profound impact on the bond market. And the expectation from, I think, Navarro and others, and I think also this man Lutnick, were that foreign capital would pour in and buy bonds. Well, that's not happening. So I think it's a very dangerous situation. I think we have a very fragile economy. I think the financial system is fragile. And all of this, of course, is perfect for you because of your Bitcoin background. And the real questions are, will fiat currency survive all of this? So I'm sure you'll get to that. But so to sum it up, I'm not pleased. I'm disappointed. Can we recover from it? I don't know. The Japanese have now said, we've had it. You won't listen to reason and you make no sense. I mean, they actually went through the mathematics behind it, which of course Elon Musk publicly condemned and blamed Navarro for it, referring to him unkindly as retardo. But I'm afraid Elon Musk has a point. The mathematics underpinning all this did not make sense. So you end up with these outrageous tariffs that are way over the top. And now today I understand there's a 100% tariff on any movies that are made outside of the United States, which is kind of interesting. I don't know enough about the movie industry to know what the impact will be, but I'm sure people are not happy about it.
Do you think that they're just miscalculating our leverage in the global picture of things? Or, I mean, why would they be making such drastic measures knowing that these could be the consequences?
Well, I'm not sure that they recognize the consequences, or they probably wouldn't have done it. You used the right word, leverage. What is our leverage? And that's the question that doesn't really come up, that needs to. In Ukraine, we have no leverage. What are we going to do? I mean, I've listened to President Trump say, well, we want peace and we'll have to see how Russia behaves. What? What are you going to do? What leverage do we have on Russia? We've already sanctioned everybody to the extent that we can. I think 35 countries are under sanctions, which is really, in some people's minds, an act of war. So what can we do? I don't think we have any leverage in Ukraine. I don't think we have much leverage in finance. The real question is, I don't know what the leverage is. Look, Jeffrey Gundlach, who's one of the people I listen to carefully, very smart man, he'll scoff and laugh at you. And he looked at these tariffs from the very beginning. He and DiMartino Booth and both said, this is bad news. They were right. So can we recover? I don't know. Japan has clearly said, thank you very much, we're out. And the Chinese and Japanese are already doing business, for the most part, in their own currency. So I think this is probably going to accelerate de-dollarization. If that was the intention, then that worked. But I don't think it's a good idea.
Do you think that could be the intention? Because Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been speaking publicly about the need for a new Bretton Woods or a new reordering of the financial system. So that's the question I keep having is there some secret strategy that we're not aware of where they're actually doing a controlled demolition in order to maybe switch the reserve asset from the U.S. Treasuries to something like gold, maybe eventually Bitcoin?
Well, it comes up a lot. I listen to a lot of President Trump's most ardent supporters, and they say, oh, this is part of a bigger strategy. Well, I keep looking for the strategy. I don't see any strategy. I see emotion and impulse, and a failure to understand that the world they live in is very different from the world they think they live in. I think that's a huge problem. You just go back 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and we were paying $200 billion in interest on the national sovereign debt. Today, it's what? Over $1 trillion. That's a new world. How much can you do under those circumstances? How much freedom of maneuver do you have as a nation state? And is that going to get any better as a result of the things that President Trump and his administration have done? My answer is I don't think so. Now, as far as Besson goes, and he's a very bright man. I mean, this is a highly intelligent person, and I'm not the right one to second guess his views on the economics. But are we talking about a new Bretton Woods? Because I listened to him carefully, and he talked about breathing new life and credibility into the existing institutions that were set up. In other words, he was arguing these institutions have failed to operate properly. We have to go back to them and put them in order. My suspicion is that Bretton Woods is over. Now, when will that strike home? When will it become so obvious that we can't deny it anymore? That I don't know. That's why I was, before we started talking, we were talking about 1914 in London. And this is before war was declared, and people were making what we would today call runs on banks. And everybody wanted gold. They wouldn't take silver. They insisted on gold. And the British government, the British banks were paying out people in gold. The war began and it stopped. And then everything was reversed. Everyone's gold has to go back in the banks in order to support the war effort. The reason I'm bringing that up is that I don't know where Mr. Besant is headed, but I don't think backward will work. I think we're going to reach a point where we're going to have to meet with the leading powers in the world and deal with this indebtedness, deal with this sovereign national debt. I mean, a few years ago, I think when we first spoke, I talked about a debt holiday.
A debt jubilee, yeah.
A debt jubilee. This sort of thing happened under the Holy Roman Empire, also in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. When levels of debt reached a certain point, they couldn't possibly be paid. Well, they said, that's it. We need to go back to zero and start over. In those times, the people that ruled had more power than the bankers. Today, it's been very difficult to do that because the bankers have more power than the people that are ruling. So I don't know what the answer is, but I'm a little skeptical of what Mr. Besant wants to do.
So do you think that they're overplaying their hand? Did they expect for all the countries to just line up and fold and say, we'll come to the table and do whatever you want?
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
Isn't that just hubris? I mean, at this point?
It is hubris, but it's also linked to arrogance. I mean, arrogance and ignorance, I would say. Ignorance of reality or an unwillingness to see reality. It's not 1991. And when you listen to President Trump and many of the people around him, you would think it's 1991. Nobody has any choice but to do what we tell them to do. We are the principal power in the world. It's our unipolar moment. Well, I think that the Russians and the Chinese and the Japanese and virtually everybody else have tried to politely tell us that's over. And one of the arguments that I make frequently, that I think Mr. Besant needs to understand this, we're not talking about a multipolar world. What we're seeing is great civilizational states roaring back into existence, into power. What do I mean by that? Russia is a civilizational state. It represents Byzantine culture and history. It is a civilization, a construct on its own, apart from Europe. The same thing is true for China. China is a civilizational state. It is roaring back into strength and power, where, by the way, it was for at least 2,000 years. We don't realize that up until a couple of hundred years ago, maybe 300 years ago, China was the leading manufacturing power in the world. It was the leading economy. It was one of the richest countries in the world. Now, some people will say, well, India was very rich. That's true, but it wasn't a very effective state, whereas China was. Japan is another civilizational construct. It's its own civilization. Iran, Persia, another great civilizational state. All of these places are roaring back to health, back to existence. Now, we can look at this as, oh, this is awful, this is terrible, or we can welcome it as an example of health or an index of health in the whole global system. I tend to see it that way. I don't see it as a bad thing. But you've got Washington that sees itself as the center of the universe and does not wish to change that view. And when you listen to President Trump, I listened to him this morning when he said, well, we'll say what the Russian behavior is and then we'll decide. I almost fell out of my chair. What planet are you on? The Russians don't give a damn whether or not you like their behavior. They have a set of interests. They are pursuing those. Now, those interests do not include ruling Europe. That's a lot of nonsense. But they are damn well going to defend themselves, and that means they're not going to allow Ukraine to be a state that is a permanent threat to Russia, any more than we would allow Mexico to become a permanent threat to the United States or Canada, or for that matter, anybody in Latin America I can think of. So I think there's a certain disconnect. This falls into the category of where do we stand financially and economically as well. If you misconstrue the world, if you don't understand what you're dealing with, and I think that's true for us at the moment, then you reach, wrong conclusions. Well, why isn't everybody buying the bonds? Why are people dumping bonds instead of buying bonds? And what does this mean? What we are facing in the future, I think, is exactly what Nassim Taleb said and several other people for the last several years, Armageddon. Now, there are a couple of ways to deal with it. You can face up to it and acknowledge there's been a lot of mismanagement. I mean, President Trump doesn't have to take responsibility for all of it. I mean, an awful lot of it is other people's fault. But we got to recognize what's happened. So what do we have to do? And right now, he wants a military budget, a defense budget of over $1 trillion. It's insane. How do you sustain it? He should be cutting that budget by 50%. But that means to re-examine all these overseas commitments, to pull back instead of push forward. The people around him will say, don't worry about it, boss. Don't worry about it. It's irrelevant. But we know from experience, all you have to do is pick up Paul Kennedy's book, The Decline of the Great Powers. Go through all of them, and everybody goes bankrupt. They overextend themselves when there's no need to. They spend more money on defense at a point in time when they are more secure than they've ever been. That's what we've been doing. We've been creating these phantoms that present dangerous threats to us, when in reality, the world doesn't have to be threatening to us at all. But try to get that through to anybody's head in Washington right now. Nobody wants to hear it. So I think this is a very serious problem, and reality could visit us very soon in very, very tough ways. We haven't even talked about the very real probability of an armed conflict in the Middle East involving us and Iran.
Mhm. Well, it seems like people are stoking that, and I did wanna get your thoughts on it because every time I turn on the TV, it seems like that narrative is getting more and more inflamed, and President Trump, I think one of the reasons why people voted for him is he was supposed to be the no new wars president. Will that happen?
Well, it doesn't look good. He unfortunately talks himself into a corner. He's hyperbolic. And remember, this is a man who is arguably a marketing genius. And he sells things to everybody. He sold himself to the American people on a scale that's hard to imagine. Well, you're like me. Everything's going to be better. We're going to win so much. You're going to be tired of winning. No more losing. And on. And now we talk about the golden age. Well, unless he's got more gold than I think he does, I'm not sure we're going to go into the golden age. And I think instead we've got to batten down the hatches and prepare for tough times. I think we've got to retrench. It's better to admit that up front than it is to raise expectations, which is what he's done. Done the same thing in foreign policy. If Iran wants a nuclear weapon, it can't have a nuclear weapon. If it tries to, we're going to go to war to stop it. We can never have that. Well, a lot of things happen that people said could never happen. And the real question is, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, let's assume that happens, is that an immediate threat to us or anybody in the region? Well, the Israelis will tell you it is. But it's only a threat to Israel if Israel is an expansionist, aggressive state. Where do the American people fit in? What do they think? By the way, where's the debate about the wisdom of doing this in the Senate or the House? There is no debate. Apparently, everybody thinks this is a good idea. I listened to a statement by Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania this morning saying that we should do everything we can to destroy Iran. Be prepared to completely destroy it, because that's vital for Israel. Well, that's interesting. Is it really in our interest to destroy Iran? Do we want to stop Iran's production of oil and natural gas, on which Japan and China and Northeast Asia in general is very dependent? What are we trying to achieve? How does it benefit the world to reduce Iran to ruins and poverty? And then who benefits? Well, the Israelis think they'll benefit, but perhaps the Turks will benefit, because the Turks are the 500-pound gorilla in the corner that nobody talks about. They have the largest army and air force. They have a hugely powerful, disciplined military, unlike Iran, that has no chance whatsoever of ever invading Israel because they have no capability to project power. The Turks could march all over the Middle East,
Wow.
largely unopposed or in war, and you couldn't stop them. Again, Turkey's back. It's another civilizational state. It was the historic leader of Sunni Islam. We're not paying attention. What about the Russians? Do the Russians have an interest, and the Chinese, in Iran? Well, of course they do. The One Belt, One Road construct is impossible without Iran for China. And Russia needs Iran's goodwill because Iran has an enormous influence on stability, not just in the Caucasus, but Central Asia. We don't live in these places, so we don't understand what the various interests are. And this is going to get us into a lot of trouble unless we step back, reevaluate all of our assumptions. The world is not what we think it is.
Well, and it seems like our adversaries are building harmony among one another. And I want to talk about China for a moment. What's at stake there? Because it seems like they really have the chips and they have the power in this negotiation. They're a net producer. They have the energy grid. They have the rare earth metals. And I think that President Trump or his advisors, they thought that China would come to the table. But at the end of the day, for the last several decades, we've been basically trading our appreciating assets for depreciating goods, right?
Very
And
good.
they have all the power.
That's right. You'll recall that when we last spoke, which I think was on election night last year, that you brought up China, and I said that tariffs would not have a positive impact. It would have a very negative impact because China has already developed alternative supply chains. China has other markets.
Mhm.
China is the indispensable market today on the planet, not us. And I think Donald Trump and his friends have it backwards. They think we are indispensable to everyone. Not really. What do we make? What do we produce that other people need? And I've forgotten the author. Is a brilliant economist, or maybe he's just a financial analyst. I don't remember, but he came up with what he called the 3 Bs. Okay. Bushels, bonds, and barrels. Okay, so bushels, yes, we export agricultural goods. We are an agricultural power. We've been that almost from the beginning. In fact, we've slipped. We need to reinvigorate our agrarian sector hugely. You know that from the Midwest. There's too much that we're not doing in that area. But now we're killing our farmers because of these tariffs against China, because China was buying from us. Now China is buying from others. It's not as though they can't. And then when you go from barrels or bushels, then let's go to barrels. Energy, oil, natural gas, petroleum products. We export those. Not anymore. The Chinese aren't going to buy those. So what else do we build? Well, we used to be a microcircuitry superpower. Back in the early 90s, we were the ones that controlled the microcircuitry. It's gone. We've lost that. Now we can stand around and we can blame that loss on China. But the same people that control your markets and have enriched themselves to become billionaires many times over, they're the ones that shipped it out. The American worker was never asked. So if you want to punish someone, look at the people that are responsible for hollowing out our manufacturing base. Stop talking about China. Again, the tariffs, no one thought through the consequences because they have a false picture of the world and China and us. And then bombs. What else do we export? We export military equipment. We export a lot of munitions. And, of course, we routinely bomb people we don't like,
Right.
who don't do what we tell them to do. That's it. So how do you fix that? How does that make you rich as a country?
Right. Well, I want to touch on what you said about the American worker was never asked about any of this. Scott Bessent and pretty much everyone in the Trump administration is saying that the focus is now going to be on Main Street. Wall Street has had its turn. But there are a lot of people in Main Street America, people that voted, people that consider themselves part of MAGA, who are upset or at least nervous about the tariffs. And they're wondering if things are going to go in the right direction with all of this. They're nervous about potentially a recession or a crash. What's your message to them?
My message to them is that they were sold a bill of goods by a marketing genius, that their interests are really not at the top, and that the policies we are pursuing are not going to help them. That's the message. I think they're figuring that out. I mean, as I told you before, if you're a farmer, you're involved in agriculture, none of this helps you at all. It's devastating. And then when you look at the energy market, this notion of we're an energy superpower, not if you can't export it, not if you're not selling it effectively, and not if you behave as though you're the only game in town when obviously you aren't. I mean, those products are fungible, as you know, in the petroleum market. I think they've been sold a bill of goods. I think they were promised something that's not going to happen. And, of course, the endless wars. Remember, he said, we're going to put a stop to that. I'm going to end the war in 24 hours in Ukraine. How? No leverage. I mean, I thought it was interesting when he turned to Zelensky in his office and said, you don't have the cards. You can't do that. Well, he's right. But neither does President Trump. What are his cards? The only card he's got is he can pull the support for Zelensky, which he should. That is the quickest way to end the war. If we're not supplying military assistance and support, if we're not pouring cash into the place, it's done. Europeans can't sustain that. He knows that. So do it, and this war will end. Stop pretending that Zelensky is something he's not, a legitimate leader who is widely loved and respected and being honored by his countrymen. Absolutely not. It's a Stalinist state. People are being rounded up and pushed into gunfire. It's the worst possible set of circumstances. Ukraine is being killed. Its youth are being killed. If he wants this to stop, he's got to sit down and come to an arrangement with the Russians. Whether he likes it or not doesn't really matter. And we have no leverage over that unless we pull the support, and then the killing will end. And that's what President Trump said he wanted to do. He said, I want the killing to end. Well, then end it. He hasn't done that. In fact, we just had another package for $500 million approved to go to Ukraine. So the killing will continue. And then he blames everything on these two powers. It's your fault because you won't sit down and talk. And that's where I think President Trump could have led and been most effective with the Europeans and us and Ukraine. But there's no evidence for that. There doesn't seem to be any willingness. The criticality of ending the war in Ukraine was always part of the larger effort to come to some sort of strategic stability model. And the Russians wanted that. The Chinese want that. We should want that. A model of stability that everybody gets something that they want, but everybody doesn't get everything they want. That's where we ought to be, and we have to remember we don't live there. They do.
Well, it seems like a collection of policy errors. A lot of people disappointed, even those who voted for Trump. Is there anything that you can look at and say, I'm actually optimistic about this, or we can pull out of some of the things that are happening?
Well, President Trump has the power to do a lot of things if he wants to. The bad news is we have presidential government now. That means that the president is the key decision maker on everything. Congress is a collection of fugitives from accountability. They don't want to be held responsible. Earlier today, Judge Napolitano told me an anecdote about his discussion with someone named Charlie Rangel, who used to be a representative in Congress from Harlem in New York City. And he noted that Obama had just decided to attack Libya. And Rangel said, and he said, well, that's not really constitutional. There's no declaration of war. Why are we doing that? Muammar Gaddafi did everything we asked him to do. So now we're bombing him.
Well, that's why Luke Groman and some of the other analysts who are predicting that maybe we're going to revalue gold or have something. I mean, maybe they have something up their sleeve in order for us to recover from some of the economic pain that's being spread around.
I don't know. Somebody said that if we revalued gold, it would be kind of a default in and of itself. I don't know. I haven't looked carefully at that one. That's a tough one, but I wouldn't bet the farm on it. I think the better move is the one that nobody wants to make, and that is, look, we have to live within our means. If you could cut $2 trillion out of the budget, that would be a dramatic step in the direction of reducing the sovereign national debt and the interest payments, and it would also cultivate goodwill. But that requires a few things. 50% of the Defense Department helps you. What about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? Is it time to admit that everyone under the age of 50 or under the age of 60, I don't know what it is never going to see Social Security? Nobody wants to say
No
that.
politician will admit to that.
Yeah, but that's what's required. And then what's required is somebody like Besament, who is obviously a very intelligent man, to look at the alternatives. What's the new construct? What do we build instead of Social Security? And the funny thing is, remember, Social Security was always supposed to be temporary. It came into existence during the Depression. Like everything else in Washington, whatever's temporary becomes permanent, right?
And always expanded.
Yeah, always larger. So that's one thing. Now, a lot of people don't like Doge, but if nothing else, our friend Elon Musk exposed the fact that there were 30 million people on Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, I can't remember what it was, and they said some of these people were 120 years old. I mean, I laugh. I shouldn't laugh because they're stealing
Right.
from us. Well, that's the problem.
Right.
So, too many things are too big, and you can't manage everything as effectively as you would like centrally. Some things have to be centralized. So you've got to start looking at alternatives to what we've been doing. There are ways to look at regions in the United States, organizing states into regions, and then driving down some of this to the regional level, where there is hopefully more accountability. Because
Hopefully.
the biggest problem we have is, of course, accountability.
Right.
When's the last time anybody's been held accountable for anything?
Yeah. Well, the Doge thing is so interesting because they have uncovered so much of this waste, fraud, and abuse, but yet it has really only made a tiny dent in what we're actually spending. And to your point, I mean, if everyone is on the government's payroll in some way or another, then everyone is sort of wondering, wait, okay, cut somewhere else, but don't cut mine.
Well, Besant said that. He's right. He said, what would it say? Don't cut me or thee behind the tree or something like that.
Yeah.
Of course he knows that, but it has to happen. This goes back to something else. When you enter these sort of difficult waters, you need an ethic, a set of behaviors that are ingrained in the population that involve sacrifice and self-denial. That doesn't exist in America. Everything is microwave technology. In other words, microwave behavior. I want it now. I go to the restaurant, I want it now. I want a car, I want it now. So how do you talk to this population and say, that's not possible anymore? We can't fund that. We can't sustain it. That's not popular.
Well, and they want reshoring and manufacturing to happen now here, but those types of CapEx investments, they take years to pay off. I mean, I'm talking 5 to 10 years. And when no one knows that these tariffs are here to stay or they're going to go, no one knows, how to play this in terms of the market, right? Or for businesses to actually make these investments. So how do you think this is actually going to play out? Will Trump have to fold in some way?
Well, somebody told me the other day that everybody raved about Henry Ford's great achievements. It took him 30 years. And he was the man that built the assembly line, the affordable car. He was a hero in Germany. That's how you got the VW. The Volkswagen was a direct consequence of German admiration for what Henry Ford had done. If there hadn't been a war, VWs would have been all over the place in Germany and greater Europe. I think that's an enormous problem right now because Donald Trump doesn't want to deliver that message. And his advisors are going to say, don't do that, boss. That'll ruin you. You'll be finished. Well, my message is if you don't deliver it, you really will be finished. Because at some point, the whole thing is going to come crashing down. And it may come crashing down sooner rather than later because of a war. Because the war with Iran, there's this assumption that we are all powerful and that we can act with impunity, and the Iranians have no chance. They'll have to submit. Don't think that's the case. So if it were my choice, and obviously I'm not there, I would avoid these wars completely. I would get most of the forces out of there. I would say we'll host whatever peace conferences you want, but we're not going to be a co-belligerent in this. We want the region to sort this out. We can't. Nobody wants to do that here. We want to be the main player at the table. This is part of everything we do is mortgaged to national narcissism. But instead we come home and we have to deal with the issues here. We need to stop this fantasy of returning to Europe or returning to Asia on the World War II model. It's over. We're never going to get there. So if that's the case, why not come home, step back and say, well, perhaps it's time now to re-examine everything we do. We'll save a lot of money. We'll cast off a lot of unneeded equipment, but that's a horror show for the defense industries. If you're at Raytheon and all these other places and General, oh my God, we make all our money from repairing old junk and producing another version of the same stuff we used 30 years ago. We can't do that. But we could do it all. It's going to be painful, but it's going to be a lot worse if we continue to ignore reality and postpone the reckoning, the financial, economic, strategic reckoning, which is really what we're talking about.
What do you say to American families who are just wondering when some of the wealth concentration is going to decrease and when prosperity will actually return to the working class? Is there anything that could be done if you had the administration's ear?
Well, it's worse now probably than it's ever been, but we need to keep something in mind. There's always been a concentration at the top. You've always had the top 10% remarkably well-heeled as compared with the average worker. The difference is that, let us say in 1905, 1910, 1925, the worker's salary was X, and the man at the top's salary was 12 times X.
Not 300 like today.
Right. That's the difference. That's the difference. I was reading the other day about a court case brought by Dodge against Ford. And Ford, and this is Henry Ford, was concerned about improving the lives of his workers, raising their pay. And so he wanted to plow profits back into them. So Dodge went to court against Ford saying, what about your obligations to your shareholders? The court ultimately found in favor of Dodge. You have your first obligation to the people that invested their money with you, not the people that are working for you. See, Ford didn't see it that way. We've lost that balance. There used to be a balance. There is no balance anymore. I hate to say that I have to listen to somebody like Bernie Sanders and agree with him. But on this point and on these kinds of points, he's not wrong. Now, what you're asking is, how do you fix it? The one way you can't fix it is to take money from the people that have it and give it to the people that don't.
Right.
That never works. So you've got to figure out, how do you do this? I don't have an answer. I know that something has to be done. And if I were running or I was the president, that would be my focus. I would try to bring the best minds in and say, how do we do this? Now, one of the ways you do it is you get all this excess population, the 50 million illegals, out. Anybody who says that they're a benefit is wrong. They are not a net benefit. Anybody who says that they don't take jobs away from citizens is wrong. They do. It's not a benefit to us at all. So moving them out will help. Moving them out will also raise the price of labor and improve wages. But that's another matter. These things all have to be carefully studied and executed. Is anybody doing that? I don't know. What I hear are hand waves. Oh, it's going to be great. We're going to do this. We're going to win this. We're going to be, and everybody says, hey. Okay, how much longer can that go on? Especially when you look and you see that the food is more and more expensive.
Right.
Your children are with you around the dining table because they can't afford to live on their own. So you've got the multiple generations in one house, which is not all bad, by the way. I'm not a critic of that. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. I grew up in that kind of home. But what I'm trying to say is that when I emerged and went into the Army in 1976, I could reasonably expect that I could own a house at some point, that when I did get married and have a family, I could afford it. So what do you have now?
Right.
So those things all have to be addressed. We're not going to address them with slogans or empty promises. So back to Mr. Besseman, I always screw up his name. He's right on so many things. He's a smart man. He's got to go back and focus on these things and help the president and the team work their way through this. But that still is going to require a great deal of courage.
And sacrifice.
And sacrifice. Americans are going to have to exercise some self-denial. We don't like that.
Well, and people have gotten so tribal that they defend the person that they supported, even when they have to be able to see something wrong. Like, I mean, with Biden's supporters not being willing to admit that he had some cognitive issues. But now with what Trump is doing, hurting, aspects of the economy, some people are defending him and say this is part of the plan, right? Why is it so difficult for people to be able to criticize, their team, their own team? Isn't that healthy? We're supposed to be able to debate things.
Yeah. Peter Drucker said something that's so true, and he's also one of my favorite people. I love to go back and read Peter Drucker. He said, people always cling to the obsolete. If you want them to stop doing something old, you have to give them something new to do. That's what we have to do. We have to give people something new to do. I'm talking about the government. I'm talking about in the private sector, everywhere. We're not there yet. We're still clinging to whatever we did in the past. And as Einstein said, if you do that, what do you end up? You're insane because you keep doing the same thing, even though it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, so this is a perfect segue. There is something new, a new money, a new currency. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin, since I know you're a supporter.
Yeah.
Is there a way out of this with the help of something that isn't a fiat currency, that isn't tied to any sovereign risk, that is completely an alternative asset that anyone can opt into peacefully?
Yes, and it's Bitcoin. And I think that will happen. It will not happen immediately. I would expect that Bitcoin will track with the market to a large extent until at some point people realize there's nowhere else to go. How much gold can you hoard at home? Not enough. So where do you go? Do you go to somebody else's currency and essentially put yourself at risk in some other society that's still based on fiat currency? No, I think you go to Bitcoin. Now, people will say, well, who knows what it's really worth? And that could all change instantly. Well, a lot of things could, but I don't think it will. So I'm one of these people that thinks that Bitcoin will ultimately replace fiat currency. The other thing is we don't know what the other half of the world will do. We're watching BRICS develop into a new system. And their system is designed to hoard enormous quantities of gold at a central point. And then you do business. And when you do business, the gold is transferred in the central point from one place to the next. Will that work? I don't know. But I'm a believer in Bitcoin for us in the West, because I think our banking system is a mess. I think it's corrupt. Whether you're anything that you turn to right now, from the Fed to the settlement bank in Switzerland, I've forgotten what it's called. They're everything. You've talked to Fitz. You know what she has to say, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just think we'll reach a point where there's nowhere else to go.
Interesting. All right. So as we start to wrap up, I know we've talked about some really heavy things, but
You want to talk about light things?
well, let's leave folks with that sense of hope that I know that you do have, that things will get better. It's why you do your show, your new series, Our Country, Our Choice. So tell me a little bit about why you do have hope that maybe we'll be able to right this ship.
I think that we will eventually come out of the other end of this trauma that we're about to go through, which I think is inevitable. And we will not be the same after we come out as we were when we went in. I do think there's going to be a lot of civil unrest. I think we'll begin to see it this summer. I think there is a racial content to it, as well as an economic one. There are a lot of unsolved issues in our society, and they're going to have to be addressed, whether we like it or not, however painful it is. I think we're going to go through this trauma. Now, how long will it last? How violent will it be? I don't know, but I think it's coming. So people want hope. I'm going to give them hope that those of us who call ourselves Americans will ultimately pull together as Americans and restore this country, restore the rule of law, rebuild our society. But that's going to take time, and it's going to take strength and power. It's not something you can wish into existence. You're not going to hold a meeting at somebody's house tomorrow night and everybody prays when it's over and walks home and feels better. It's going to require more. That's one of the reasons we founded Our Country, Our Choice. We wanted to be bipartisan, cross those party lines, get everybody together who believes in what we do, and then say, look, we've got to work with each other. We've got to network. We've got to support each other and be prepared for what's coming, because it's going to be more than the police can handle in many cases. And I think the military is going to become involved. And that's another troubled area, because the military is not the highly disciplined force that I knew back in 1990, 91, not by a long shot. And the leadership is terrible because there's been no accountability. Where there's no accountability, there's no performance. And we need a new strategy. You can't approach military spending without looking at economic productivity and prosperity. Eisenhower used to say, the American people deserve security and they deserve prosperity. We have to provide them both. Eisenhower cut national defense budgets dramatically in the 50s, reoriented the strategy of the country. We're going to have to go back and do something similar.
And you talked about Henry Ford earlier. He talked about how if the public actually understood the banking system, that there would be an uprising tomorrow. And so the more that we can empower people with education, not to have anything violent in terms of an uprising, but really to stand up against the powers that be, the elites, and reform the system in a way that's more fair for everyone, right?
Well, you know that our economy is being financialized.
Yeah, it has been.
We don't produce much. We don't build much.
No, we make paper promises. Those are the treasuries that no one wants anymore.
But more than that, every time money moves, there's a transaction fee.
Yeah.
And so you have people that have become billionaires
Yeah.
based on transaction fees.
Right. Nothing productive for society. Yeah.
And
we're angering the people who are producing the things that we buy. So
whether you like J.D. Rockefeller or Andrew Carnegie or Henry Ford or not, they produced things. They built things. We're not doing that.
yeah. Yeah. I saw someone tweet that what is the incentive to actually build a business? Because to your point, you're going to be rewarded more if you do things like buy back stock than actually invest, take risk by investing in the company, purchasing something that will expand your operations or paying your staff better. Why would you do that when at the end of the day, as the CEO, you're going to make your shareholders happy and you're going to make your compensation package even bigger by just doing the very simple thing that inflates all the assets, right? That's what we see.
But just the other day, I was listening to my son who rants and raves about these things, and he said something I thought was very interesting. And I immediately thought of Donald Trump. Louis XVI as king, when he was crowned after his father died, everybody was glad to get rid of his father. His father mismanaged the economy of the state and everything else. And Louis actually cared about the French people. He wanted to do a good job. And people said, long live the king, provided the price of bread falls. That was the chant.
Interesting.
And in 1789, the people of Paris could not afford to buy bread, and you got a revolution.
Right.
I think there's a lot more of that now. Yes, Donald. Yes, President Trump. We love you. You're great, provided these things happen. And as you pointed out, whether it's inflation or it's financial, what's the right word, integrity, unless these are addressed, unless we scale back on these overseas adventures that, as he has pointed out, cost trillions and there's no return on our investment at all, unless these things happen, things are not going to go well. And I would not rule out anything in the near future.
That's so interesting. Yeah, we'll have to watch and see, because the very issues that people voted on, those are the things of greatest concern right now. Thank you so much, Colonel Macgregor. This is just a pleasure and an honor as always. Where can people
thanks.
find you?
And I hope I'm the most popular guest.
You are.
You just said I was one of many popular guests. I was
You're the
shattered.
most popular. You're the most popular. Tell people where to go to watch
First,
Country
well, you could just look up Our Country, Our Choice. It'll take you to the website. You can Google my name. We've got this first episode of our new show. The show is called, for lack of better, ideas, Macgregor. Now, some people have said, well, you need to have it Macgregor, and then underneath it, Macgregor's rant, or whatever. Who knows? Right now, we're just calling it Macgregor. But the first episode is out there. It's being very well received, despite the efforts at Google and YouTube to suppress it with the algorithms as usual. It's actually doing pretty well. And I think people will like it. It's about border truth. What's really happened down on the border and what hasn't.
Right, no
And
bias.
yeah, and I think they'll like that. And the people that I talked to are very real, solid Americans. And I mean that. They were real good people. We're on to the next one now, which is called On War, which is going to focus on why are we going to war? How do we go to war? If we go to war, what does it mean? And what are the costs involved? And we've got a lot of good people lined up for that one. I spoke to Judge Napolitano, who's going to lead off and talk about this utter constitutional failure to address that seriously. And then talked about just war doctrine, which is implicit in the Geneva Convention and other international treaties and organizations. We've ignored all of that. And Americans haven't paid much attention. That's the biggest problem. They have their own problems. We know that. But they've got to pay attention to this, because this war, if it breaks out with Iran, will be like nothing they have seen.
Wow.
Certainly not since, I would say, the Korean War or World War II.
Wow. Okay, so there's great urgency. I will make sure to link the series in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.